Is there any particular...
It's not just a doing it for the sake of, oh, I remember that. Here's my money.
Member
Is there any particular property you're thinking of which might not have good writing?
So I haven't seen the movie, but a couple weeks ago I saw the Jurassic Park trailer for the newest one, and I was...
What is it, like the fourth of the reboot now?
Yeah,
no, it's the third one.
Oh, okay. Whatever. I had seen the one that came out about 8 years ago. The same, because I wanted to go see the Fury Road movie, Mad Max, and they missed the opportunity. I actually went to the theater.
Another good nostalgia bait.
That was a great movie, though. And the Jurassic Park that they had with Chris Pratt and the Velociraptor motorcycles and the woman running in the heels, and that was horrible. And it's just, why did you have to ruin something I liked? And I saw
to be fair, the other Jurassic Park sequels were pretty bad too.
But they were enjoyable. They were like an enjoyable sort of trashy, and that was fine. This one was soulless and horrible. And I saw the trailer for the newest one that's about to come out, and it was just like, do you remember all these people that were coming back? And do you remember the spitting dinosaur? It's just like, because they put the fucking spitter in it. It just made me so angry.
Yeah. Well, that undersells it by a little bit, because if you want to be more mad, they did the same thing that Star Wars did, right? Because they were like, the T-Rex is no longer scary enough, and we already did the Spinosaurus, so now we're going to genetically breed an even bigger, scarier dinosaur. It's like, why though? Like, that's not the point of the movie.
I was the nerd kid that loved the dinosaurs. I wanted to go see the dinosaurs, not the fake shit that they were making. That is a different movie. That's not what I'm asking for out of Jurassic Park.
Right.
Yeah. I wanted the dinosaur. I wanted the T-Rex, the Megalosaurus.
Well, I thought the whole point of that was that people aren't interested in the old dinosaurs. That was the plot of the movie. Was that people don't want the old. They want the new. They want something.
They were
wrong.
Yes,
there was also a slightly ham-fisted social commentary.
They were wrong.
Right. I was going to say, like, they took the very subtle but very present themes of corporate greed and overreach and that sort of thing, and they made it like the primary driver of the plot in this movie, right? Because that's the whole point of genetically breeding the dinosaurs and lack safety standards. Like, Hammond was incompetent. Right. And he was like a miserly penny pinching kind of dude. He wasn't necessarily doing it out of greed. At least I never got that, out of all the things. He just
movie anyway.
Right. So like, but that flipped very much on, I mean, really they did it as early as like Jurassic 2, right? Jurassic Park 2, because you've got the mercenaries and you've got the InGen stuff and all of that starts to come up, but they kind of make it the focus of Jurassic World. And to me, that wasn't necessarily the focus, right? Like the irony of Jurassic Park, the first one, is that John Hammond spends the entire movie telling you how he spared no expense, except for the security IT guy who's running the entire joint.
Except background checks and surveillance of his employees.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, those didn't exist back in the 90s.
But I mean, even still, like all of that notwithstanding, he probably could have saved costs on, surveilling all of his employees if he actually paid him what he thought he was worth, which, you're a billionaire. Get with it. Oh, weird. That's not totally relevant today. Anyway. So, but yeah, it becomes, I don't know, even more preachy. But yes, like Jurassic World is absolutely on the list of nostalgia bait, along with one of your other favorites, The Matrix. So.
Oh God, that's on a category.
I don't even know I can't classify that as anything other than just. Nostalgia bait doesn't cover it.
It doesn't. No. It doesn't, because it's bad even as nostalgia bait, but it's very clearly a cash grab. It's just.
Well, so are all. Bad. I mean, they're putting the cart before the horse and making 4 more Avatar movies. Like, I'm sorry, I know that movie made a lot of money. But that movie made a lot of money because of circumstance. It made a lot of money because of the 3D stuff, and that was a big gimmick at the time. It made a lot of money because of the visuals. And now, I really don't think anybody gives a shit anymore.
I mean,
so we told Space Pocahontas, and now we're going to...
There's something in the Avatar movies of, like, James Cameron's still the one intimately involved, and so it's his baby, something about that. But that didn't save The Matrix. So it's like there's one good possible thing that might be saving it, making it at least a coherent story, but there's not that didn't help.
I mean, let's face it. If the prequels taught us anything, it's the guy who creates a thing is not immune to fucking up the thing.
Very true, and yet the prequels were still better than the last trilogy.
Well, yeah,
a lot better. But I mean, is that the bar we want to set?
Well, I think there's the.
It's an okay bar. It's a bar you can reach. You can reach the quality of the prequels, and they.
So one of the weird trends that you see in the nostalgia bait nowadays is that there's commentary on it being nostalgia bait. It's, I mean, I guess Gremlins 2 did this thing, right, where it's like a sequel about sequels, or Scream 2 is a sequel about being a sequel. But like the Beverly Hillbillies movie, or the Brady Bunch movies, or the Addams Family movies, or any of those movies, middling sitcoms turned into big budget 90s movies, it was strictly nostalgia bait. And sometimes you had the commentary of, wouldn't it be weird if, like the Brady Bunch, would it be weird if this family was completely unchanged from the 70s? We add a little social commentary. But for the most part, they're pretty straightforward nostalgia bait.
Right. So, I mean, the callbacks can be done well.
Right.
But they're using the callbacks to carry everything else. And that's really where I think is the problem. It's like the trailer of the newest, whatever the fuck they're calling it, Jurassic Park movie, was just, do you remember these people? Do you remember this awesome moment that happened 30 years ago? And that's it. What else is the selling point? It was just literally member berries.
Well, we brought this up before with Ready Player One, right? Which is just that's all that movie is.
Right.
And that's what the book is.
The movie and the book, yeah.
There is a difference.
The book is an encyclopedia of the 80s, like, and all that pop culture. So.
And if the pop culture is the selling point, like Stranger Things, part of the draw of like it is the period of the time, and that's not to me the same thing as, do you remember this previous version that was successful that now we're trying to hang on to be able to make more money soullessly?
So you would put this in a different category than American Graffiti, or what's that show with the Fawns? What's it good? Happy Days, or Happy Days, where it's definitely nostalgia bait.
Right,
but
a period time piece is not the same thing to me.
Forrest Gump is definitely nostalgia bait, and for like a broader cultural thing.
Yeah, and I think we accidentally used the wrong term when we're talking to nostalgia bait, because I didn't want to talk about, like, I wasn't trying to lampoon, at least, of like something that's set in the 50s, or like LA Confidential talking about like noir. It's like, that's not the point of it. It is.
Yeah, Forrest Gump isn't nostalgia bait because they're not calling back to your childhood necessarily, and that's not an integral part of the movie.
Transformers,
right? Pleasantville isn't nostalgia bait. Just Transformers is nostalgia bait. The new Star Wars, like all of them, right? Like Rogue One, all of that stuff. Those are nostalgia bait because in many cases
got some
they
good stories
involve,
out of some of it.
which is fine, and that's not the point of this part of the conversation. But what's going on is like they shoehorn in stuff that doesn't necessarily even belong there, because you got to get FaceTime with your old flames, right? They got to shoehorn in Transformers, the whole thing is nostalgia bait, right? Like any of Michael Bay's movies that I can think of off of the top of my head since the early 2000s, Transformers, Ninja Turtles, Battleship, what else is there? He basically just shit on your entire childhood, to make these movies, because it's got the name of something that you enjoyed as a kid, so you'll go watch it, right?
His is the only slight difference I would make is not that I disagree, but I think he took the same wrong lesson that Disney took after Pirates of the Caribbean, which is, we can make this weird thing work. Now let's do it with every other thing.
Right.
And Michael Bay saw that and was like, well, explosions.
Right.
I'm not sure there's a direct correlation, but because Disney did go through a phase where they were like, what other rides could we turn into?
Well, yeah, movies, they did the Haunted Mansion, and now they're doing another one. They're doing
what's the other one?
They're making a new Haunted Mansion.
They're rebooting Haunted Mansion.
No.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I promise you.
It's so terrible.
I promise you.
The first
you
one
have children, and you will take them to see it.
Yeah, no, because like the first one was so bad we had forgotten how bad it was. So it was like, hey, it's on Disney Plus or wherever we saw it. So we watched it with the kids, and we're like, nope, it's still terrible. And now I remember why I don't remember. Because it's that bad.
They did Tomorrowland, which is slightly different, but same general vein of.
See, like, I mean, I could sort of see that with Tomorrowland. Like, I don't have any old history there, right? So I don't necessarily see what the nostalgia bait is, but I feel like that was an okay story. And I think that's going to be what the takeaway here is, right? Like nostalgia bait can be okay, but it can't be the primary thing. Like you're not going to go watch a CGI movie because it's CGI, right? You're not going to go watch a nostalgia bait movie because it's nostalgia bait. It can be incorporated well,
but you kind of,
and then there's the ones that are like obviously terrible. And that, oh my God, it's Transformers is like the main takeaway from the movie. Do you like explosions? Do you like Transformers? Boy, do I got the movie for you, you know? What about giant dinosaurs, since we can get off the Michael Bay train? But
part of what will drive this, though, is anytime you get a group of fans develop some kind of fandom around one particular, not just genre, but a particular property. And anytime you have that, and if it's been moribund for so many years, it develops this kind of a cult of it, and so you want to support the franchise. You have this feeling that, oh, it's such a small franchise, or we need to support it. There hasn't been any new Star Wars stuff other than these books in the 80s.
Other than the last
pick a different example.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
There's no way you can say like, oh, it's such a small, unrecognized franchise, and then follow that.
No, I would say that's probably what those people feel.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I would feel if I grew up on Star Wars and I saw Return of the Jedi, and then nothing for so many years, and I'm just gonna eat up all the books, eat up all the comics.
Yeah, like that's like saying, "Oh, Marvel." Who's ever heard of Marvel before 2008? Like,
well,
that's literally all they did. You know, Star Wars was 95% the comics and everything, despite what Andreas and Disney want to tell you. So.
And Benjamin's point is that is a very niche, small audience compared to big time movie-going audience.
No.
Yes,
dude, you guys are fucking out of your mind. Like, how many video games were created? There's still a huge amount of merchandise. Like, George Lucas didn't just like disappear and become homeless after the 3 movies were made.
That's not what Ben is saying.
But you're ignoring. Star Wars has been one of the largest IPs for the last 40 years, period. How do you think they maintained that if there wasn't new content? Just because you didn't consume it doesn't mean that the content wasn't there. And I'm directing this to you and Kathleen Kennedy, for fuck's sake.
I totally read the comic. I totally read the comics.
So I must be entirely missing your point.
What I'm saying is, if there hasn't been, it started off as a movie, there hasn't been the movie, you're gonna watch all the movies. If it hasn't been a TV show, you're gonna watch the TV show. You'll want to watch the Star Wars Holiday Special. It'd be like Weird Al has in the White Nerdy video. It's the contraband because George Lucas destroyed it, and it's legendary. You want to have it. This kind of collector mentality. However, it develops, sometimes because there isn't much property, and sometimes just because the fans have more of an appetite than there is stuff for it.
Did we stepped out? But did we talk about the Snyder Cut yet? Because I feel like this is probably
not yet. Let Ben's still on Star Wars and how there wasn't enough content.
To some degree, Star Trek is another great example. How much?
No.
Yeah, sure it was.
Star Trek is an even worse example than Star Wars because there's been a continuous running show since the Next Generation up through Enterprise, obviously, and there's like 3 concurrent shows right now.
Well, now there are, and this is one of the examples where there's a lot of member berries going on, or at least there were in the early seasons of Discovery.
Like Enterprise ran through like 2003, so there was like, you know, we could say there's a 15-year gap, maybe, but not. It's an even worse example than Star Wars. So
it's a long time for a lot of people that didn't get news.
My point was just an appetite for a particular franchise, and I think there was a feeling around fans who loved that there was a continuous series, but all of a sudden there wasn't a continuous Star Trek on the TV for between Enterprise and Discovery, and so eating up and controversial about the movies, the Abrams movies. So I think there's, all I'm saying is that when you're talking about nostalgia bait, some of it comes from love of a particular property. Rather, and then right on those coattails rather than on love of the ideas or what was enjoyable about the property, just kind of the superficiality of the property.
And I mean, if we want to rag on the Abrams movies, I'm down for that all day, right? But I don't think it's the same thing as saying that there wasn't anything coming out of these IPs for that amount of time. But like for the Abrams thing is weird because I don't know that I have a credible source, but this had been something that I'd heard around, you know, the 2009 Star Trek and I kind of believe it. And I did see some comments from him from interviews that kind of like backed it up enough for my mind. Right. So I'm going to say right now that this might be one of my biases, and I haven't looked into it all that much more deeply in the last 10 years. But one thing that had been coming out of there was that Abrams specifically avoided having people who knew Star Trek work on Star Trek 2009. Right. And that's why you get a lot of the stuff that you do. And to me, that's an even more blatant ripoff of the nostalgia bait in a way, because, you know, the monetization piece comes from, we're going to take the name, we're going to take your old favorite characters like Spock, for example, and we're going to shove them in my movie. Right. My movie is not a Star Trek movie necessarily, but I'm going to have enough of the things that you're going to recognize that you're going to come and give me dollars so that I can go and buy a mansion or whatever bullshit spin you want to have on it. Right. Whereas like he had deliberately come out. And so like one of the few legitimate things that I hold against him, like, you know, are backed up in interviews and that sort of thing, is that he said he wasn't going to do Star Wars because he's already the helm of the Star Trek movies. He doesn't want to do the Star Wars movies. And then we see exactly what he's done with the Star Wars movies, right? So as soon as he sat down...
just a repeat of what was already there. Why was Force Awakens just A New Hope? Like, that was one of the things that really pissed me off. It's just like, I had wanted something new. And not only did he basically repeat, like, the story beats, okay, I could kind of get that if you're really doing it, but why the fuck did you do Starkiller Base?
Well, yeah, but I mean, Starkiller Base is the obvious, right? But there's so many like missteps in that movie because like I've got John Boyega's back on this. All of the material leading up to the movie that I saw set Finn up as an obvious, like, he's a sleeping stormtrooper. Maybe he's where the Force awakens. And then all of a sudden Rey's got the Force powers. And it literally took me like 3/4 of the movie to be like, wait, it's her?
And then she broke
it's her the whole time,
and
because
nothing
he's
mattered.
the one like even wielding the lightsaber the first 3/4 of the movie, and then she pulls it out of the snow, and then boom, she's a Jedi now, and it's like, Jesus Christ, is that the story?
There's a lot of things wrong with that movie, but it's just like, I guess the Starkiller Base is where I really broke with the fact, like, why did you just repeat the exact same thing? All you did was make it bigger, nothing new about it, just bigger.
Right.
Well, and that's some of the problems with sequels too. Don't forget, Jedi is the reconstructed Death Star, right?
That's an oversimplification in my mind, but okay, you know.
Like, the newer, bigger.
Does it count? Does it count as nostalgia bait when it's part of the same trilogy? And you know they're like what, 5-ish years apart? You know, less than 10.
So part of nostalgia bait is that huge gap. Then,
well, what is nostalgia? What is nostalgia? No, and this is important to talk about if we're going to talk about this here, because what's the difference between nostalgia bait and actually continuing the story, right? If the sequel movies, if Abrams had come up with a brand new story that just happened to involve our 3 to 5 main characters, if it had Luke and Leia and Chewbacca and blah blah blah, but 20 years later, is that actually nostalgia bait just because it has them in there, or is it just a sequel?
Not into at least what I was hoping that this conversation would be at.
Well, no, because you can have that movie and you can have the nostalgia bait would, assuming it was there, would come in the elements of the movie. So Rey finding Luke's lightsaber. That's nostalgia bait.
Yeah,
the movie itself is a shitty ripoff of what it's just it's a hollow copy. The nostalgia bait is the elements in it where it's like, hey, here's Luke's lightsaber, or hey, here's the Millennium Falcon that we found on this planet that looks exactly like Tatooine but isn't Tatooine. Here, these kinds of things.
No, this is not Tatooine.
That's it's designed specifically to get all those things you see on YouTube where audience reacts to stuff in the movie theater and people are filming it.
Crate is the perfect example of that, right? It's not Hoth to the point where it's salt.
Yeah,
and not snow. Like Jesus Christ, man!
Yep,
like
and we're gonna have the Imperial Walkers and the thing again.
Yeah, it's literally. Do you remember this? Do you remember that moment? Because we're gonna try to get that without having to do any of the work for it. We're relying on the previous point. So even if it was a new trilogy,
with early Marvel, which was better at this than later Marvel, where in Iron Man 2, where he's trying to build the element and a prototype for Captain America's shield is just kind of there. And he uses it as a stabilizer for what he's doing and it's just like, oh shit, look at that. But it doesn't, it's harmless. It doesn't do anything. It's just there to be
stuff. Stay in the background.
Right.
So something like
Easter
the War Machine,
right.
the War Machine suit, also in the first Iron
right.
Man.
And I think that these are things that
next time, baby.
They're and Andreas just said it. You can have Easter eggs, and you can have even things that are going to be plot relevant as time goes on. But you have to then, you can't. It can't just be point and there's the reference, and the audience went gasp, and now we're moving on.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think what it comes down to is, you know, a lot of the same things for a lot of movies, right? Like if you go see like you know, certain fairs of violent stuff, right, where it's just whether it's a thriller or it's a murder mystery or it's Jason versus Freddy, for Christ's sake, which is absolutely nostalgia bait as well. You got to have more than human sprinklers to populate your movie, right? Otherwise, like, I mean, that's all it is, right? It's part of why I don't necessarily go in for more of the torture porn types of movies. And, you know, maybe I should go watch Saw 1, but I can skip the other 4, right? You know, yes. Like that sort of thing.
Definitely.
You know, because you need to have more than just those ingredients, right? A cake is not the sugar that you put into it. You can't just pour a bunch of sugar in and be like, boom, cake. That's not how it works. And I think that's the same thing with nostalgia bait, right? Nostalgia bait isn't bad. CGI isn't bad. But when it's obvious and when it's the main element of your movie, that's where it starts to be.
So it's rather than like the Last Crusade having the Ark of the Covenant in the background of the movie. Right. That's not a problem. It's when if it were just that.
Other movies since, you know, like every time there's a government warehouse, somebody in the props department makes that crate and puts it in the warehouse, right? You know, so like,
and a cameo is not the same thing as the bait, because what they're trying to hook people on is, do you remember this feeling that you enjoyed and that I'm trying to cash in on? The cameo is just, oh, that's cool. That for someone who's looking for it. But someone who doesn't know can still enjoy it without it. And I could watch Iron Man and just think of the movie on its own without recognizing what War Machine was. And that's fine.
In the terrible Indiana Jones movie, they did the Ark thing again, where they're in the warehouse.
Crystal Skull, is that what we're...
Yeah. And they're in the warehouse and like the crate crashes and it's just the Ark there. And that I would say is the kind where it's like, oh, you remember this, right? We're on for another ride here.
Oh, that's what I think I was thinking of that one. I think I was thinking of that.
The nostalgia. Yeah. Did you get it?
That to me is like, it's not as egregious as some of these other things, but it's in that same like, oh, you know.
So Crystal Skull absolutely would qualify, in my opinion, because you know, like they all but cast Harrison Ford just to make sure you went and watched the movie, because you're not going to watch Shia LaBeouf take up his mantle. That's not what you were there for.
So the amount of time in between things, I don't think matters. It's whether it's being self-referential or trying to bait you with something else. So even if everything was being made within 5 years of these past Star Wars movies, however long it actually took, because it's referencing itself and trying to cash in on it, that's what counts. It's the same thing, I think, at least one of the reasons that ruined the season 4 of Community, because they kept trying to make jokes of, I made the reference from what happened 3 seasons ago. Aren't I funny? And it isn't, because it wasn't a joke on its own. It was just a reference.
Right. Yeah, no, and I mean, I could see something like that with that example, but I don't personally get that feeling from Return of the Jedi, but I guess we'd have to dig into it deeper if we really cared, you know, but
I mean, to me, Return of the Jedi is more of a case of unoriginal. It's going back to the well for the sake of it's less so, do you remember this thing, and more so, I didn't have a better idea. To me.
And that I would believe that from Lucas, absolutely. You know, but there's still enough new stuff that happens, right? You know, like, yes, okay, there is a Death Star 2, it's bigger. Yes, there is a fleet battle, but it's not just with snub fighters this time. It involves actual fleets. You know, all the Endor stuff, like it or, you know, or not, you know, that's all relatively unique and I feel was a pretty great add to the movie. Not necessarily the Ewoks themselves, but I mean the Rebel Commandos and everything, just that whole sequence of events. You've obviously got the redemption. Like, there are great things in this movie, but yes, you know, the foundation that it's built on is we've got the same stuff as the original Star Wars, but bigger. Darth Vader's command ship is a super Star Destroyer, which is way more bigger than the first Star Destroyer. So I guess I could see the same kind of arguments.
To be fair, that was an Empire.
But, well, I mean, it starts there, but it crashes into the second Death Star and Return of the Jedi. But
see, and some of that stuff I feel like it's okay to get away with because, you know, it's sort of, it's the Empire, right? You would think they would have these kind of resources. Some of them would be bigger and better than the other one. And then you see it later on again in TLJ, where it's like, oh, here's this big ass ship that we could have had at any time. But now it's just here.
Right. So it seems like the key idea of this of what you mean by nostalgia bait is that it is cheap emotion, a very cheap, superficial emotion from something you recognize.
I think that's a fair general.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like it's all glitter, no substance, right? When you watch the whatever X property where they're just doing a callback, and it's like it's not really an Easter egg. It's not really plot relevant. It's not really. It's just it's just kind of like the I think the Tatooine, not Tatooine. Like, why? It could have been on any planet. It couldn't. You could have done something way more interesting, but we're gonna do it here because we want you to remember Tatooine.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I mean, yeah, so like there's obviously gradients as well, and I think there is a tipping point where it becomes somewhat acceptable versus like egregious, to reuse that word.
Right.
But
there is a difference between bait and an homage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because like one of the other examples I pulled out of Forbes article I was reading about earlier, which basically was kind of what we were doing here, and was just like a bitch fest about all the terrible movies that came out, right? Was like all the Disney reboots, right? We've got to do live action Disney reboots. Is there any functional reason to do that other than nostalgia bait? Yeah. That's absolutely, you're only going to go see it because it's a live action Mulan or it's a live action.
I haven't actually seen any of them, but at least I will give them this. At least the Mulan story is completely different.
Yeah,
right. And so that can be a benefit to it.
Right.
But
it's also politically a problematic. So,
whatever they did with the decision of Lion King of making them less expressive so they could be more realistic, bad decision. Right. Entirely a bad decision, ruining the thing that we enjoyed from 30 years ago.
Speaking of ruining the thing that we enjoyed before, what about Godzilla, right? The Godzilla movie that we watched, is that nostalgia bait for Godzilla fans?
Oh, probably.
Yeah.
Especially since they were mad about it.
Understand. Yeah, I was going to say, and you can kind of understand why the Japanese fans were so pissed. But
the new ones are just better, right? I haven't seen them, but that's the impression I've gotten.
I did the Godzilla versus Donkey Kong one, and that one's pretty good. So
those are. I think
Kong.
The new Godzillas are more
King Kong. Nintendo won that lawsuit.
I think the new Godzillas are more of a. They're not really selling it on Godzilla the same way, because like the first one, you look at it, that has a feel. It didn't quite execute, but it has a feel of, oh no, we're doing a monster movie, and they've got this serious tone and this, that, and the other thing. And then they graduated to the monster smash 'em up Pacific Rim thing because it sells. It does. So, yeah. Well, that's the other part of this conversation that's going to go hand in hand, is the fact that they do this because it works.
Yeah, because we keep buying it. Yeah.
Every time it works, and I mean, all the Disney remake, well, at least Lion King anyway, that made like $1 billion. I mean, Aladdin made money. This shit does what it's supposed to do.
Right.
I kind of, it's where I'm not really sure, but I think, in my opinion, they're nostalgia bait. When I'm thinking about it, is the Harry Potter Fantastical Beast movies.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I
don't think they're basically just rewriting story, and they're not really adding anything. I feel like
I would say the first one tried. I'll give it that.
I'm a non-fan, right? So I'm a target all that negative energy right now. Like, not in the sense that it's like I don't like the Harry Potter stuff, but in the sense that I haven't read them, right? Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily feel like, certainly not the first one. Like it's hard not to, this is where it's like, what's the difference between a sequel and nostalgia bait, right? Because certainly there is some stuff, the fact that this is a story that revolves around, Dumbledore in some way, right? That could be the nostalgia baity parts. However, Fantastic Beasts is a lot more adult, right? Like, I think it's definitely written for the kids that grew up with Harry Potter. And I thought it was a much more interesting expansion of the world, and just kind of seeing this is what adults do with the magic that the kids were just barely fucking around with in school, right? So like for me, one of the primary qualities of it being, acceptable nostalgia bait or not is if they do something new with it and they're actually enhancing the story. And I feel like at least the first Fantastic Beasts does that. I feel like the second one very much kind of is like, yeah, let's harken back to the jokes of the first one, because, sorry, Jacob, but there is, Jacob's like one of my favorite characters because he's fucking hilarious on that. But I mean, there's other good stuff. I love seeing the Aurors. I love seeing people actually be competent at their job, because like when you see the Ministry of Magic, in the first set of movies, it's just like, nope, we're going to bury our head in the sand and we're all terrible at our job. Like
same
we're just
in the
all
books.
bad.
The first one had like one or two obligatory references, and then obviously Grindelwald is revealed at the end type deal. But that's
right.
It's its own thing. Going forward, they did, because you can't. It makes no sense that this is a whole big Dumbledore story, but here's this weird magical animal guy that's getting involved in every high level thing that's ever existed for no reason.
Just go for the Dumbledore story if you want to do the Dumbledore story.
You can do that. It's a prequel. I mean, it's basically money writes itself.
There is so much you could do in like any of these worlds and properties. Just like I feel like where I'm like, I don't feel like is the Mandalorian. Is that bait, or is that? I think it's actually good, and they do go.
It's drawing you in with bait, but it still might be worth it. I've not seen it. I can't comment, but it just because you enjoy it doesn't mean it's not bait.
I mean, that ending of season 2 was bait, kind of, but also, I mean, that was good.
A prequel or reboot are not inherently wrong. Like,
yeah, so Mandalorian is bait. However, they do somewhat expand the universe and try to do something that they haven't done before, right? The Book of Boba Fett is obviously bait because it's got Boba Fett's name on it, and from like the middle episode to the end, it's not the Book of Boba Fett anymore. It's the Book of Mando. They're just not going to call it that. It's Mandalorian season 2.5. And that's how you know that it's bait, because they literally brought the other guy back to the show,
No.
It is, but like the second half of the Book of Boba Fett is good because it has the Mandalorian, and the Mandalorian is good because that's got all of Boba Fett's personality that everybody keeps telling me that there wasn't any reference for. We couldn't do Boba Fett right because he had 3 lines in the movies. So what were we gonna do? Well, everything that you liked in the Mandalorian, that should have been Boba Fett. They just didn't put his name on it for whatever reason. But it's literally the same shit.
The episodes without Boba Fett do have better production value. They do have that.
Die on that hill.
Well, I mean, the new Obi-Wan show is the perfect example. That is nostalgia out there. They play you Duel of the Fates at the beginning to get you hyped up and get all these people on YouTube to go, oh my God, I can't. And it's going to be... And Andres is going to love it.
And I have great hopes for that, though. It looks like they're...
It works. That's why they continue.
Is it a new hope or is it an old hope, though? Or just a great hope?
No, and you know what?
Battered hope that still lives on somehow.
What happens when half of the show doesn't even have Obi-Wan in it? Because it focuses on these weird enforcer peoples, one of whom is probably going to turn good by the end because, again, I can write this shit. This is just like...
Sorry, you lost me when Andreas coined the title for episode 10. Star Wars episode 10, An Even Better Hope.
Yeah. So, the best is hope. But I mean, all these things they have planned, right? Like, little Leia is going to be in it and meet Obi-Wan. Okay, well, that doesn't make sense. Thank you. Right. They're going to have him and Vader fighting twice. Well, thank you. I don't want that. But people are going to eat this shit up.
Yeah.
I would say the good difference is Rogue One, where you have the Vader scene at the end, right, that everybody loves. Mm-hmm. But that's, I would say, fan service done well.
Right.
That's like, okay, you get to see Vader being a badass in a time and a place where it makes sense for him to be being a badass.
Because it picks up right where the first movie started.
Perfectly fine. Right. Makes sense.
And it sets up why he's there. Sure.
We're nostalgic.
And it wasn't in the trailer, was it? Was it? I
don't remember if it was or it was. I think the only thing you see in the trailer is the breathing. It cuts to black. You see the breathing, and then you see the lightsaber ignite. But you don't quite know the circumstance.
Right.
I believe that is in the trailer, but don't quote me on it.
And just to clarify, like from what I recall around the time, Rogue One was initially being sold as the first Star Wars movie without a lightsaber in it. right?
It might have been.
And the fans clamored for like, wait, how's that going to be? We're not going to have any Jedi, and some were cool with it and some weren't. And then the Vader thing being absolutely clear nostalgia bait got tacked on at the end. And it's great and it makes sense and I'm fine with it and whatever. But I think that's clear. So, you know.
Oh, you know, it's 100% nostalgia bait. There's no other reason for it to be there, but it works in a different. Right. You know, because again, I don't think anybody here would say no nostalgia bait. You can't have nostalgia bait. It's just got to function.
It has to make sense. It has to be serving the story. It has to actually like cohesively. It isn't just the cash grab of I did this thing, now give me money because this is what you wanted to see again and again and again. And I mean, I remember when Rogue One came out that I was getting really pissed off with the cash grabbiness of everything. It's like I didn't see it for years. And it's like only until after several people told me all of the characters die because there cannot be a Rogue 2. I was just too mad about that.
And then what's the wrong lesson they learned from this show? We're going to make a Cassian Andor show. Nobody's going to fucking watch that thing.
I'm gonna watch it at least a little bit. So
just to spite them.
here's the problem, right? So with some of these bigger IPs though, right? Like I'm gonna be there to give it its shot every time because I like the material.
You're
not
the problem.
Necessarily. No, that
Andreas
in a way, but I think it's more nuanced than that, right? Because I'm not necessarily there. Like I hate the nostalgia bait as well. For like to take the Kenobi example, Vader and Kenobi should not fight. Period. They might do it well, but they should not. And part of it is because, you know, the first thing that Vader says to Obi-Wan on the Death Star is, when last we met, I was but a learner. Now I'm the master, which is absolutely not going to be supported by whatever the fuck is going to happen in Kenobi. Right. And, you know, we could quibble about that as fans all day, but
if they do, they're going to have a really clunky, terrible line about how Obi-Wan's like, you're still not a master.
Right. And I mean, I'd be fine with that. It'd be like, oh, I missed this leg last time, and he cuts off a different leg. Fine, whatever. But so part of the nuance I think here as well with some of these IPs is that, you know, for a while now, as an adult, I've realized that if I want people to keep making the content that I like to consume, I have to pay for it. Sometimes even if it's bad. Right. And so I will give everything its fair shot. I was sitting with Star Wars and it was way worse than I imagined with The Force Awakens. Right. You know, I at least had a little bit of faith in The Last Jedi. And a lot of that is like, you know, after the fact, like, yeah, it still wasn't really all that great. And the third one was just absolutely terrible. Right. But I'm not sitting there just like drooling, waiting for Luke Skywalker to come through as CGI. You know, which they did great in Mandalorian, but was, you know, otherwise unnecessary, right? You know, like I'm not necessarily there for the nostalgia bait, but I got to be honest, when it's done right, it's absolutely my favorite of some of the movies, right? You know, like we've kind of danced around the topic the entire time, but I think Marvel in a lot of ways does it well. You know, like there are certainly like bad nostalgia bait times. Like there are certainly like, you know, those references and whatever. But a lot of their early stuff was, we're not really sure this experiment's going to work out. So you get Captain America's shield being used to prop up a particle accelerator in my basement. You know, you get stuff like that, right? You get names dropped in the background, you know, like news articles or, you know, even as far as yeah, it was Winter Soldier, where you have the Insight Project in like, oh, there's Doctor Strange. That's his first name drop in the MCU, or you've got all of this other stuff, right? That's all there, but it's not egregious because only the fans are going to pick out of it, right? It's not like front page news where like Doctor Strange crashes car into river, you know, or some nonsense, you know.
Well, I think it's twofold. You're especially in the very first few movies. One, you're playing with house money, so you have a lot less to lose. And two, they had the overarching plan. And that's where I think you know, you can show Thanos turning his face at the end of Avengers and people are going to go nuts, but you also have the faith that, well, they're building toward this. This makes, okay, we're good. It's not just there for the sake of having it. And, you know, as it goes on and becomes, but then they take the wrong lesson. It's all that, or it becomes more of a vehicle to consume the next thing rather than to be excited for the story. You're just like, here's your next thing. Here's your next fix.
I don't see it that way, obviously, but, you know, I could see how some people see it that way. So, I mean, obviously, yes, they want you to see the next movie, but certainly with like the Phase 4, and maybe that's where a lot of people have problems with the latest phase, is that, you know, like where's the nostalgia bait hook into Shang-Chi? Where's the overlap with Eternals? You know,
the nostalgia bait hook in Shang-Chi, I think, is, I would say pretty clearly, is Abomination. That's your like, oh, you, because they did the thing and they gave him his ears and whatever, and people went nuts for that for some reason. I don't know why.
Am I missing something?
When they're doing the
Abomination,
match?
like,
yeah, from the Hulk.
Yeah,
when he and Wong are doing their
Rock.
weird steel cage match thing.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. But I mean, I'm not saying that there wasn't stuff in Shang-Chi to tie it back to the universe. I'm saying, where did one of the other movies, because we're talking about cause and effect here. You're saying that somewhere in like Infinity War, for example, it's less about what's happening in Infinity War and it's more about setting up what's in the future. And that's what I'm saying. Like, nothing, in my opinion, set up Shang-Chi, but certainly when you watched it, they brought in Wong and they brought in, you know, other elements to tell you, oh yeah, guess what? It's a Marvel movie.
Oh yeah, no.
So
what I would say the difference is they don't have the same, they don't really seem to have a plan in the same way that you did for the first 3 phases, right? So whatever that story was going to be, they at least had something they were going to do. And now what they have is a bunch of things that they're doing, and they have some stuff in it that you are going to recognize from the comics. So you're going to do this and that, but more or less, it's not even a matter of not being interconnected, because you can always, you know, you can make those things happen theoretically. It's a matter of, they're just kind of doing it to do it, and then at the end you get your post-credit stinger and you're ready to go on to the next one. But there's nothing really, it's not the same anymore, because you're not building towards anything. You're just pointing people to the next theater.
No, I mean, I don't agree with that. I'm not sure which is going to be the bigger. Well, I think the multiverse is going to be the big overarching Thanos plotline. They are building to something. They are built like the Shang-Chi's multiverse. They set up multiverse in Loki. They set up multiverse a little bit with Wanda. They're going to do it with the Doctor Strange movie. And then there's also
they did it with Spider-Man.
Right, so that's the thing. So Spider-Man did it, and Spider-Man's pretty well received, and I think Spider-Man's pretty good. But it had the
nostalgia bait, though.
Right, it is.
Like,
that's definitely
borderline egregious,
but really, really well done.
But I would also say that is toned down to the degree that Doctor Strange will not be toned down, because we've heard they're going to bring in a whole bunch of shit. They're going to bring in like Professor X, because they're going to try and, I mean, it's going to explode all over it.
Yeah, but the Illuminati's a real thing. So
right, but again, so it's like, okay, so you're having that. It's going to be what? Is it a cameo? Is it you're going to see everyone at the round table talking to each other? Is it plot relevant? It's just, but
I think it's
to have it.
They're doing it to bring in the other Marvel IPs and have it make sense.
Cash grab, because like you only get to understand what this is, which is apparently going to be held up as being very important if you go watch 30 other shows or movies, which is another form of cash grab. And I hate that too.
I mean, okay, so I mean, certainly I think you're going to get the most out of it if you've been watching the movies or whatever. That's fine, but there's nothing in my mind. There's nothing that set up the Illuminati in 30 other movies, right? You're not, you know, like maybe you needed to go watch WandaVision to understand what Wanda's role is going to play into it. It might have been a good idea to see Spider-Man, because, you know, it seems like it's going to be almost like direct ramifications from that story, right? But for example, what's the difference between what Marvel's doing in that case versus, you know, somebody writing a serialization of novels, right? How much of the Dresden Files do we recommend you go read before you jump into Deadbeat, which is a pretty good jumping off point? But, you know, I would say you should probably go read the other 6 novels first.
There is a difference between reading a book series in order or reading a crazy web, hard to keep track of. You need a flow chart to know where you need to read something before you read the other thing, so you can understand how this character works and means because of all of the fucking crossovers to be able to.
That's what you think is happening because you don't watch the movies. And so when you jump in 5 years later and you're lost, you know,
because they built this web about it.
The movies come out in linear time, so it's not, like some webcomics do that as part of their gimmick.
But if I only care about one character and I only want to watch the movies of those characters,
chronological time to these movies, whether there's 5 of them or 30 of them, that would follow a series of novels, right? That's why I'm saying, what's the difference? You think there's a difference, but I don't see it that way. You can watch these in linear time.
All of the Dresden Files books follow Harry Dresden. All of the Marvel movies follow how many different characters? How many different individual storylines? And yes, they have crossovers, but those are different subjects.
Dark,
like Herald
so of Dark, are you going to tell me that Dark followed linear time and that
it is one story,
it wasn't confusing at all?
Complete that I didn't need to watch another show to understand?
Yes, but okay, so your problem is that Spider-Man's one franchise and Doctor Strange
is another, and Guardians of the Galaxy is another, Doctor Strange is another, Black Panther is another.
But so first of all, I think each segment stands on its own, and each content generally stands on its own. But maybe it's just not for you, because kind of the point is that it's all one thing, that it's the Marvel universe, and ideally you consume all of it, because that's the point.
That is true. That's kind of the point of the Marvel, even the comics from the 60s. So that's its whole shtick. And I could back that up. Not that I understand what you're saying, Director. There should be something you can just watch and then be done with, and lower stakes maybe, or smaller stories.
Right. And
it's not a giant soap opera.
The crossovers or like the merger movies, they can be done right. They can be enjoyable. I watched some of them. I watched Avengers. I've watched Civil War, shit like that. It's just when some amount of it is overemphasized of you have to go watch these other things to be able to understand and get it more. And so when I say I didn't like this character, it's like, oh, and the other response is just, well, you didn't watch his show. That's why. Because they're trying to make more money that way. And that's why they're incentivizing for it to work. Because I have read and enjoyed extended universes of a lot of different things, and I can enjoy those individual stories on their own without needing the histories, but those histories do add content to it, and on that basis, that's fine. That's not my issue. The issue is they're using it the same way as bait.
I don't agree. To me, it would be like if you said you're reading Stormlight Archive and you're saying some of the other books because they interconnect. That's bait. Right. It's all connected.
That is it for some of it, yeah. I mean, that's a very good example of like the fact that Hoyd shows up in Mistborn was like, who is Hoyd? What is he doing? And every time he does is like, how are these interconnected? And I do enjoy it sometimes. Maybe it's just the amount of the way that Marvel did it. I didn't enjoy it because Mistborn can stand on its own I don't need to read Stormlight to understand Mistborn as its story. It is interconnected, but it also stands on its own.
Well, it's Stephen King's books too, right? They're this big interconnected universe, but you don't really need any particular.
Supposedly, I've not read them.
Well, I think maybe
Stephen King stuff.
I was literally going to bring that up. I was going to say, like, what about the Dark Tower stuff? Like, just to give another point of reference, because to me, I'm an outsider, right? But the Dark Tower stuff, I understand, stands largely on its own, but I also feel like is a large amount of like nostalgia bait, where it's like, you should go familiarize yourself with these previous stories because they set up foundational elements. But I've read, a decent chunk of his like other stories, and I generally kind of get the broad strokes, I think, of the Dark Tower. But to me, that's what it sounds like. But I've met some diehard fans of the Dark Tower stuff that are probably like grinding their axe right now.
I don't know. Never read a single thing he's ever written. So I just know that his universe is fairly interconnected.
But all of that about Dark Tower actually does kind of keep me from reading it because I don't want to have to go read 40 other books to be able to enjoy those. They are level entry is hard.
Well, but I think you're kind of overselling it too, right? So like I think there's a difference, for example, between jumping into the Avengers movie or Civil War or Infinity War or Endgame and being annoyed that you don't know all the moving pieces are, because those are capstones, right? That's like, reading a finale of any of your book series and be like, who the fuck are all these side characters? Well, they got introduced elsewhere, right? So that could be part of that, right? You know, maybe you see some of that in the Dark Tower, but I don't think it's that egregious anyway. Whereas, like, you know, you don't necessarily have to have seen anything else to go watch an Ant-Man movie, right? I think that's a difference. You know, you don't have to have seen Iron Man to understand what's going on in Ant-Man. And that's a quibble right there. And in the same sense, like, you might have your enjoyment enhanced by reading it before you go read the Dark Tower series or The Stand, you know, because some of those elements directly cycle into the larger story. But at the same time, I don't know if that's a requisite, right? You might understand some nuance a little bit better, or some of the, you know, the metaverse or multiverse or whatever you want to call it, that, you know, that he's created. Because, for example, you set up some of the major villains and some metaphysical powers and that sort of thing. But I don't know enough about the Dark Tower to really say, like, you have to go read these, but that's where it becomes a little nostalgia bait as well, though, right?
There is the example we can talk about of Dresden Files, of Peace Talk Battleground, sure. All of that, all of those side characters that you saw in all of the side novels, short stories, you did need to know those to be able to understand why and how things happened in the duology.
Right.
And it did actually impact people. I mean, I had already read all those books, so it was fine.
Right.
But other people who hadn't, it's like, who is this character and why is he reacting like this? Who is River Shoulders? They did actually miss out on that. And so it incentivizes them to go. And their experience was worse.
Their experience was, I would say...
So I'm the Marvel Dresden fan, and you're the Dresden fan talking like you don't understand the exact same thing is happening, but with Marvel. Because I was going to go with Changes, but Battlegrounds and Peace Talks works too. How can you be mad that you don't know who every member of the Fellowship is in Changes if you didn't read the preceding 11 books?
All of the Fellowship had showed up in the main series of books. People didn't need to have the side stories to know.
But if people didn't start there, right? If people just jumped to Avengers/Changes, then they wouldn't understand the story, and that might annoy them, right? That's why I'm saying there's a difference between the capstone types of stories where, like, shit comes together. And, like, you could probably read Deadbeat and not necessarily be like, you know, who the fuck is Butters? Because, like, Butters shows up before, right? But you don't necessarily need to know what he does in those other stories. So I'm just trying to illustrate where we've got some common ground, where there is a slight difference between watching some of these bigger stories than there is, like, for example, have you seen Spider-Man No Way Home yet?
Nope.
It's a shot in the dark, but did you see any of the other previous Spider-Man, you know, like Spider-Man 1 through 3 with, so, and but you didn't see the Andrew Garfield stuff? I wouldn't necessarily tell you have to go watch all of those, but if you did, it might improve your experience. That's the difference, right?
So it works about as well as it works about as well as Spider-Verse. Then I haven't seen it either. So Spider-Verse has all these weird characters.
Spider-Verse is different, I would say.
Is much more different because Spider-Verse, like, I'm not sure any of those characters are any kind of canon. I think a lot of them just appear for Into the Spider-Verse, right? So you know as much as anybody else when you watch that.
Actually, each of them.
I actually think they all have had it.
Or comic book canon, at least.
Maybe not the. I don't know about the anime one, but I think all of the others are definitely. I'm pretty sure all the
anime ones. Age Noir Spider-Man is canon somewhere.
Yeah, I have the comic book right over here.
Well, show us.
Okay, go find. I have the Noir Spider-Man comic book.
I want to see it. Noir, Spider-Man Noir definitely was one. I know Spider-Gwen was one. I was pretty sure that Spider-Ham was like a Looney Tune type thing once upon a time.
There was the they had the joke comics for a while.
Yeah.
So would you say it's a requirement though that I go watch these before I watch it?
That's why I use it as an example.
I would.
Yeah.
Here you go, Justin.
It's got some glare on it, but
blur in the background.
Let me change the camera just a second.
But even at the end with the pointy meme, and it's like Spider-Man 2099 or whatever that was. That I know was a comic.
Right.
There might still be some glare, but it's reviewable now.
Right. Didn't he have a hat in the cartoon or in the Into the Spider-Verse?
I assume that was just Nick Cage doing his Dresden Files off-brand thing again.
Right. What is his deal with that, dude? Like, maybe we should try to get him as a guest.
He is the kind of person that would still probably come on this fan podcast show. I guarantee you he would.
That's what I'm saying. Like, what's he going to turn down? Come on. Like
Director Alex, shoot his publicist an email and we'll get him on.
Right. It never hurts to ask. So
sometimes it doesn't hurt to ask.
We should get his take on nostalgia bait too. Like, do you do this because of the nostalgia? Do you just like the aesthetic? Like, do you just walk around in a, you know?
It would also be like, so we know you had a big hand in that the Sorcerer's Apprentice. How much Dresden did you get the writers to read?
Yeah, right.
Before you wrote it.
Well, but what's weird though is the Sorcerer's Apprentice is like, that's based off another book, isn't it? So it's not. I
think the inspiration is basically he really likes Dresden and he had a big hand in it, but they didn't have the rights for it, so they made a Dresden-esque character and told a different story
IP.
And stuck in a different IP.
Usually it goes the other direction. If they have like an individual story that they stick in a bigger IP, and then both of them suck.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I could see something like that where they certainly borrowed aesthetics from one for the other, etc. But like the Sorcerer's Apprentice is literally a different book too, though, right? So that's what I'm saying.
I think isn't it based the name? Basically, it's not based on a book. It's based on
a song from Fantasia.
The piece of music, the Fantasia thing, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. So the piece of
the thing where Mickey's got the hat and he's doing the
yeah. No, I don't cite the old magics to me. I was there when it was written.
Well, I'm just saying. This would have gone. This was back in the same kind of, we did Pirates, now let's do Haunted Mansion, now let's do yada 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 name brand.
Of course,
versus. Well, because those are different kinds of nostalgia, right? You're basically that is straight up just taking the name, but you still have to make the story because they're theme park rides or these little short things, right? So there's still room to tell something original while using this name that a good amount of people will know to maybe get them curious.
Yeah, Pirates did it right. Pirates did it right. They had the nostalgia, the name that you recognize, but then they still had a good story inside it.
Well, Pirates.
The first one had a good story.
Did anybody watch it though because it was named the same as the ride, or they watched it?
I gotta be honest. That's the only reason I went to see it.
Word of mouth. That'll be the reason.
Yeah, no. It was one of my favorite rides growing up. Whenever I went to Disney, and two, it was like I got to see if they can pull off a movie based on this because this makes no sense.
And they did.
Yeah, that's weird to me because to me it did what it said on the tin. Right, like Pirates of the Caribbean is descriptive of the movie, not necessarily the ride or whatever. But
that's why I wanted to know what the hell is like. You're making this based off a theme park ride. I got to see how this turns out, and turned out. Hey,
you're part of the problem, EG. So
yes, when I was 11, I was happy to be part of the problem. Now, no. Now,
well, maybe that's another element, right? Just people who just want to feel that, like you said, feel like a kid again. That whole nostalgia.
That's the nostalgia bait. Yes. That is the feeling of the nostalgia bait. Do you remember how happy you were when you were 11, 12, 15 and everything was wonderful and you want that feeling again?
And so they have these movies written by 11, 12, 15-year-olds.
No, they're all 30 now, but but that's a big part of the genesis too, though, at least for this era, is that all of those kids grew up and sort of, to Ben's point, didn't get the stories that they wanted. So they started writing their own. Now, a lot of them are apparently terrible, like objectively terrible. But, yes, that's what we mean by nostalgia. That's why I quibbled about, Return of the Jedi being nostalgia bait, because it's not hearkening back to your childhood, which isn't necessarily a requirement for nostalgia bait, but I think that's one of the prime examples of, like I told people when I went to see Rogue One that Rogue One may not have been like a perfect movie, but the thing that made me giddy as a child when they did it, whether it's nostalgia bait or not, I wouldn't say it is because it just makes sense. But the line in any scene that involves lock S-foils in attack positions makes me a child every single time it comes on screen. The opening of the Battle of Yavin, it is in a way, but it just makes sense, right? It's not like you just see a plaque with it in the background or something, right? There's no way to include it that would be abusive in my, in my mind.
Christmas gets settled.
Like that, just that line, and when they start their run on the Imperial base that they crash landed on and everything is enough, right?
Well, I think that one seems like probably the most benign example because it works the same. It works exactly the same. And for as important a purpose as it does in that movie as it is in the original. So I think that just seems like a procedure. Where it's egregious is when it is substituting for anything else. If it were just lock, S foils, X foils, and attack position, W foils, and butter position, whatever it is.
Get off of this channel. I'm removing him. I've got the power.
Oh, no. But if it were just that, then that's a problem.
W foils.
Like, like we've said, nostalgia bait is not equals like you. Nostalgia bait can lead to good things, and then is it still nostalgia bait?
I mean, I put the new Dune movie as an example, as absolutely nostalgia for a lot of people, but it was fantastic.
I mean,
that's a great movie. That's perfect movie.
It was, yes.
It's people who experienced something growing up, and they want to bring that to life now. Like and then we got probably the best sci-fi movie of the last 10 years.
Are you gonna sit there and tell me if Dresden Files ever finally gets like a proper media representation that's going to be nostalgia bait because they based it off the book?
It is odd when it's an adaptation of that, but like you can also at least say that Dune was a remake or a reboot of the previous Dune attempts.
You can make those arguments, and it's important to know that a lot of the costumes are pulled in, and there are elements there, right? But nobody's nostalgic for Dune 1984, all right? And if you are, fight me.
That was horrible.
I mean, I think maybe people wanted like the heart plugs, so like if they had incorporated the heart plugs, then that could be nostalgia bait. I don't know, but. That's my quibble, though, right? Like that's like saying the Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies are nostalgia bait. Now the Hobbit movies might be because they were certainly
the TV show that's coming out this year. That's absolutely. Right. I mean, this is one of the things that is absolutely a cash grab. The way that they treated the Hobbit, it was like, do you remember how awesome those movies were? We're going to do it again, and they failed. And everyone is terrified of this TV show because what are they doing with it? And I mean,
the dwarves don't even have beards. The women with the beards.
There shouldn't be dwarven women, I don't think. But
look, guys, body positivity. The dwarven women are fully bearded. Got to have something to hold on to. Anyway,
not the beard.
It's your guys' toxic masculinity that avoids seeing the inner beauty of these stone cold hard. Anyway,
I'm willing to bet dwarven women have the most toxic masculinity of all.
Oh yeah, her penis is way bigger than mine. So, but that's also part of the attraction.
Well, not anymore. She doesn't have a beard. Okay,
that last line was a little ridiculous, but I got somebody's goat somewhere. But yeah, no, I mean,
you got Ben's. Ben's easy.
There are people who are into that,
which is weird because like Ben's in California, like shit, like. Anyway,
you just walk down the street. And
Ben's a lot more conservative than that. He hides behind the beard.
Right.
You're getting a little.
They're on to me. Escape. Abort mission.
Yeah, although his beard's bigger, so I think that
was right there was when Alex should have been.
Ben is more of a dwarf woman.
Hey, I'm not the only one with a button.
His beard is bigger.
Yeah. Well, what we really need, though, is we need some more like femboy dwarf romance with hundreds of years old elf. And
we're gonna get it
because that's what we got in the Hobbit, right? And then we've got the pretty boy elf, who's slighted by. No, those are terrible story beats. Period.
Whether or not elf human romance again, because again we take all the wrong lessons from what came before.
Right.
Yes.
They couldn't make a good movie. If you can add content to something that you're making or rebooting or remaking or making references to, you can add new stuff and it can be fine. But the thing is, if you do it bad, everything else will be dragged down with it.
Yeah.
And elf dwarf romance that they specifically did not want and they were forced to do. That was bad.
So here's a funny thing to get in before Ben says that they're allowed to do this because there weren't any prior stories, right? Is that there's over 20 volumes of historic events in the Lord of the Rings universe that, were largely set down by Tolkien and collated by his kid and then his grandkids. And, so I'm just saying, like, there's plenty of shit that we haven't seen on screen that we could tell a story in the same universe.
Amazon doesn't have rights to that, though. No, do they? Doesn't Amazon
they're doing the second age or whatever is similar in
they don't have the rights to the first age.
Right.
Yeah, so I thought they only had.
But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that none of this love triangle bullshit was in there. So,
well, it's funny because the Second Age you could do. I think it's Baron and Luthien, right? That's Second Age. If you want to do a human elf romance again, if you want to go to that well again because you think it worked, you don't have to make an OC version of it. But then again, if you're gonna make an OC version of it and it's terrible, at least you didn't ruin Baron and Luthien. So
silver linings. See, this is what the fans have to put up with. So, you know.
It's interesting. In the past couple of years, I've noticed that every time that whenever an adaptation or a remake or something was announced of a beloved IP, people were excited. But I'd say in the past 2 years, people have been damaged. Because now when I see people talking about, say, a Dresden adaptation, or like, we want this thing that'd be really fun, there's someone else going, no, they'll ruin it. It's horrible.
Well, yeah, I think I would go out on a limb and say that in the top 5 comments, you're going to have, please don't suck.
Yes,
possibly
absolutely.
The
Everyone
top 3
says,
comments.
Please don't suck. Please don't suck. Please do justice to this thing that I love. And other people were like, I don't even want to risk it.
And then there's going to be other worse people who are like, why doesn't he have a hockey stick? And then we're going to have to do it.
Yes, put the hockey stick in the background.
I mean, those guys are really just outing themselves for the purge at that point. But I mean, talking about like a brand spanking new example, Halo is doing the same thing, right? Ooh, there was an interview from the showrunner where they were like, no, we didn't play the games or read the novels, and we just totally made this show that it's like, right. So but to me, that is like, I'm not nearly as invested into Halo as, you know, some of my friends are and that sort of thing. For them, it was their defining childhood. I got out after 1 because the Xbox came along and they made everything Xbox exclusive, and I was a PC gamer. Like, I'm not going to go buy a thing just to play the game, you know, like an additional piece. But
not
it's
a real
the
fan.
exact same example. Yeah, it's the exact same example as what they've done with Star Wars and Star Trek in my mind. They're taking the name, they're taking some of the aesthetics, and they're jamming it into whatever their stupid ass story is. And then they can't understand why the fans are mad. Yeah. And it's like, why do you even bother trying to pay fan service if you're not going to commit? Like, you know, like...
Because they're like, come on, we gave you the name, there's the actor, now what more do you want? And we're going to give us the money.
Look, it's John Halo in his Halo suit. What more do you people want?
Right. Yeah. Johnny Halo with his helmet off every other scene, like, you know, Boba Fett, for Christ's sake. Like, you know, that trope comes from somewhere, right? I'm just saying that, not that I'm circling back to be mad about that. So I'm fine. We're all fine.
We're damaged.
There's what I want out of the universe, and then there's what I fucking got, and you know, they don't often overlap. You just
stop giving me shit,
right? Like, yeah.
But
at least Dune was good.
Dune was good. Dune is the prime example of it can work, but these shitheads can't do it.
Right? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Is that it for today? Have we yelled ourselves out?
I think so. Are we good? Catharsis has been reached, and
maybe a little bit. I'm sure something
else.
Do
the people who want hugs, have they received them? The people who don't want hugs are particularly grumpy about it. Are we good?
I mean, it depends on who's offering the hug.
Okay.
I'll give you a hug.
No. Yeah.
Can I give you a hug from anyone? I'm not picky.